What if a simple business trip turned into a nightmare you could never escape? Jonathan Harker believed he was traveling to finalize a property deal, but what waited for him beyond the Carpathian Mountains was not a client. It was something ancient, a castle with no servants, a host with no reflection, and women who do not live but feed. This is not just the story of Dracula. This is the beginning of darkness itself. Chapter 1. I began this journal believing it would be nothing more than a record of a routine business journey. At the time, there was nothing unusual about it, at least nothing that could not be explained by fatigue, unfamiliar landscapes, or the nervous excitement of travel. I was wrong. Looking back now, I understand that this journey was never ordinary. It was the slow, deliberate crossing from safety into something ancient, patient, and watching. I left Munich in the evening confident and calm, with the orderly mindset of a young English solicitor proud of his profession and eager to prove his worth. My destination was Transylvania, a region I knew only from maps and dusty history books. The name itself carried a strange weight, though I dismissed the feeling as imagination. After all, I was a man of reason, law, and modern education. Superstition had no place in my thinking, or so I believed. As the train moved eastward, the world outside my window began to change. The cities grew quieter, the stations less polished, the people more reserved. By the time I reached Vienna and then Budapest, I could feel a subtle shift, not just in geography, but in atmosphere. It felt as though civilization itself was thinning, giving way to something older and less understood. From Budapest onward, the journey felt slower, almost reluctant. Trains arrived late, departed later, and moved with an unhurried pace that seemed immune to schedules. I noticed that the further east we traveled, the less importance people placed on time. It was as if clocks held no authority here. The countryside unfolded into vast stretches of forests, rivers swollen with recent rains, and hills crowned with ruins that looked centuries old. Sometimes I caught sight of small villages nestled between mountains, their rooftops dark against the sky. At stations, crowds gathered, peasants dressed in unfamiliar clothing, their faces lined by hard lives and quiet endurance. Many stared at me openly, some with curiosity, others with expressions I could not quite read. When I finally arrived in the town of Bistritz, night had already settled in. The place itself was ancient, scarred by history, and strangely beautiful. I checked into the Golden Krone Hotel, an old-fashioned establishment that felt untouched by modern comforts. The landlady, a kindly elderly woman, greeted me warmly, though her smile carried a trace of unease. It was clear that my arrival was expected. I was handed a letter written in a precise, elegant hand. It was from Count Dracula. In the letter, he welcomed me to the Carpathians and instructed me to rest well. A carriage would collect me the next evening and take me through the Borgo Pass to his castle. The tone was polite, even gracious, yet something about it unsettled me. I could not explain why. That night, I slept poorly. Strange dreams plagued me, images of dark forests, distant howling, and shadows moving just beyond my sight. Whether it was the unfamiliar food, the long journey, or my own nerves, I could not tell. By morning, I felt restless and uneasy. Before my departure, the landlady came to my room, visibly distressed. She begged me not to continue my journey, asking if I knew what day it was. When I answered plainly, she shook her head and spoke of St. George's Eve, a night when, according to local belief, evil forces roam freely. Her fear was genuine, almost desperate. Despite her pleas, I insisted on leaving. As I prepared to go, she pressed a crucifix into my hand and asked me to wear it. For your mother's sake, though I felt awkward accepting it, I could not bring myself to refuse. Something in her eyes compelled me. When the coach departed, I noticed the townspeople watching silently. Many made the sign of the cross as we passed. Others extended their fingers in strange gestures I later learned were meant to ward off evil. Their kindness was undeniable, but so was their fear, and it was clear that fear was for me. As we traveled deeper into the mountains, the landscape grew wilder. Dense forests closed in on the road, and towering peaks loomed on either side. The air grew colder, heavier. Night fell quickly, bringing with it an oppressive darkness broken only by the coach's lamps. At the Borgo Pass, the other passengers grew restless. They whispered among themselves, glancing repeatedly into the darkness. When my expected carriage did not appear, a strange tension filled the air. Then, without warning, a black carriage drawn by powerful horses emerged from the shadows. Its driver was a tall man, his face mostly hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, however, caught the lamplight, and they burned with an unsettling intensity. He spoke briefly, took my luggage, and helped me into the carriage with a grip that felt unnaturally strong. Without another word, we set off into the darkness, leaving the coach and its frightened passengers behind. As the carriage sped through the mountain pass, wolves began to howl, first in the distance, then closer, surrounding us with their cries. My heart pounded, fear tightening my chest. Yet the driver remained calm, even commanding, as if the night itself obeyed him. At last, after what felt like an endless journey, the carriage came to a halt. Before me stood a massive, ruined castle, its towers rising black and jagged against the moonlit sky. In that moment, a chilling realization settled deep within me. I had not merely arrived at my destination. I had crossed into something I might never escape. Chapter 2. The arrival at Castle Dracula. I must have been exhausted, because I do not remember clearly when the carriage finally stopped. What I do remember is the overwhelming sense of isolation that struck me the moment I stepped down onto the stone ground. The air was bitterly cold, sharper than anything I'd felt before, and the silence was so complete it felt unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The castle courtyard was vast, enclosed by towering stone walls worn smooth by centuries of wind and weather. Dark archways led off in several directions, each one swallowing light and promising nothing but uncertainty. No sound echoed within those walls. No footsteps, no voices, not even the rustle of wind. It was a place entirely cut off from life. The driver helped me down from the carriage. When he took my arm, his grip was firm, unnaturally so. It was the strength of a man who did not know weakness, whose muscles felt more like iron than flesh. Without a word, he placed my luggage beside me near the massive entrance door, studded with iron bolts and framed by heavily carved stone that time had nearly erased. Before I could thank him, he climbed back into the carriage, cracked his whip, and vanished through one of the dark archways. The sound of the horses faded quickly, leaving me alone in a courtyard that felt more like a tomb than a welcoming home. I stood there, uncertain of what to do next. There was no bell, no knocker, no sign of servants or guards. My voice felt small and useless against those ancient walls, yet calling out was my only option. Before I could speak, however, I heard movement from within, a slow, deliberate step approaching the door. Chains rattled. Heavy bolts were drawn back with the groan of metal that had not been disturbed in years. A key turned in the lock, protesting as if it resented being used. Finally, the door opened. A tall, elderly man stood before me, holding an antique silver lamp that cast flickering shadows across the stone walls. He was dressed entirely in black, without a single trace of color. His face was pale, unnaturally so, and framed by a long white mustache. His expression was calm, controlled, and unreadable. He motioned for me to enter with a formal, almost theatrical gesture. "Welcome to my house," he said in flawless English, though his accent carried an unfamiliar rhythm. "Enter freely and of your own will." The words sent a faint chill through me, though I could not say why. Still, I stepped across the threshold. The moment I did, he moved forward suddenly and grasped my hand. His grip was shockingly strong and ice-cold, as though no warmth flowed through his veins. I suppressed a shudder. "I am Dracula," he said with a slight bow, "and I welcome you, Mr. Harker." He took my luggage himself, refusing my polite protest. There were no servants, no signs of any other living soul within the castle. He led me through long stone corridors where our footsteps echoed loudly, up a winding staircase, and finally into a large, warmly lit room. A fire blazed in the hearth, casting golden light across heavy wooden furniture. A table was set for supper, as if he had been expecting me down to the minute. "You must be tired after your journey," the Count said. "Please refresh yourself. Supper awaits you." He showed me to my bedroom, a spacious chamber with thick stone walls and another roaring fire. The bed was prepared, the air warm, the space strangely comfortable given the castle's exterior. After the long, unsettling journey, the room felt like a small island of safety. When I returned to the dining room, the Count stood by the fireplace. He invited me to eat, but declined to join me, explaining that he had already dined. This struck me as odd, but I thought little of it at the time. As I ate, he questioned me closely about my journey, listening with intense focus. His eyes never left my face. There was something deeply unsettling about his attention, not hostile, but predatory, as if he were studying me rather than simply listening. Only then did I truly observe him. His face was sharply defined, dominated by a long, thin nose and heavy eyebrows that nearly met above it. His teeth were exceptionally white and pointed in a way that made me uncomfortable when he smiled. His hands were broad, coarse, and strangely hairy at the palms, with nails that were long and sharply pointed. At one point, as he leaned closer, a wave of nausea passed over me. His breath carried an unpleasant scent, and I felt an instinctive urge to recoil. He noticed my reaction and leaned back, smiling faintly, though the smile did nothing to ease my discomfort. Outside, somewhere far below the castle, wolves began to howl. The Count's eyes gleamed. "Listen to them," he said softly. "The children of the night. What music they make." The way he spoke those words made my skin crawl. As the night wore on, he escorted me back to my room, assuring me that I could sleep as long as I wished. He mentioned casually that he would be away during the day and wished me pleasant dreams. When the door closed behind him, the silence returned, thick and oppressive. Lying awake in that massive bed, staring at shadows dancing across the stone ceiling, a realization slowly settled into my mind. I was alone in a place where nothing felt human, and whatever Count Dracula truly was, I was now under his roof. Chapter 3. The castle becomes a prison. Morning came quietly, without sunlight or warmth. When I awoke, I felt disoriented, unsure of how long I had slept. The heavy curtains blocked any clear sense of time, and the thick stone walls seemed to smother sound itself. For a brief moment, I wondered whether the night had been a dream, but the cold air and the weight of the silence quickly assured me that I was very much awake. I dressed and stepped into the dining room, where breakfast had been laid out neatly on the table. The food was fresh, the coffee hot, yet there was no sign of Count Dracula. No servants appeared to clear dishes or attend to me. After finishing my meal, I searched for a bell or any means of calling someone. There was none. That was when the unease truly began. A castle of such size and wealth should have been full of activity, footsteps, voices, doors opening and closing. Instead, it felt abandoned. And yet, food appeared. Fires were lit. Beds were made. All without a single visible servant. I decided to explore. At first, curiosity drove me. I wandered through corridors and staircases, opening doors where I could. Many rooms were grand but empty, furnished with old, heavy furniture coated in a sense of forgotten time. Dust was strangely absent, as though the castle were carefully maintained. Then I reached the first locked door. I tried another. Locked. Another corridor, another staircase, more locked doors. Every possible exit I searched was sealed with iron bolts and thick wood. Windows offered no escape. Some opened only onto sheer drops that fell hundreds of feet into jagged rock below. Others were barred so tightly that even a child could not have slipped through. That was when the truth struck me with full force. I was not a guest. I was a prisoner. Panic rose quickly. I rushed through the castle, testing doors again and again, my movements growing frantic. I felt like a trapped animal, pacing within invisible walls. The realization that there was no way out pressed down on me with suffocating weight. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear. I forced myself to sit and think rationally. Panic would solve nothing. Whatever Count Dracula intended, it was clear that he had planned this carefully. Confronting him directly would only place me at a greater disadvantage. I resolved to observe, to listen, to watch, and to hide my fear behind calm obedience. Later that day, I heard movement. Chapter 4. The Brides of the Night. Long rewrite American storytelling style. Sleep no longer brought me rest. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt as though the castle itself was watching me. The silence pressed in from every direction, broken only by the distant howling of wolves echoing through the mountains below. I woke repeatedly, uncertain whether the sounds I heard were real or born from fear. By morning, I felt drained, as though the night had taken something from me. The day passed slowly. Count Dracula was nowhere to be seen. As before, food appeared without explanation, fires burned without servants, and the castle remained unnaturally still. I spent hours pacing my room, replaying the previous night's encounter again and again in my mind. The memory of those women, their beauty, their hunger, their voices, haunted me more than the Count himself. They had not looked at me as a man. They had looked at me as prey. As evening approached, the air within the castle grew colder. Shadows stretched longer, clinging to the walls like living things. I tried to distract myself by writing, but my thoughts returned again and again to the same question. What were those women? I had no answer, only dread. That night, unable to endure the confinement of my chamber, I ventured out again, this time with purpose rather than curiosity. If I was to survive, I needed to understand the rules of this place, even if that understanding came at great risk. I moved quietly through the corridors, keeping to the shadows, listening carefully for any sign of movement. Chapter 5, Letters from England. This chapter shifts away from the dark isolation of Castle Dracula and returns to England, yet the sense of unease does not disappear. Instead, it follows quietly, creeping into ordinary lives through letters, thoughts, and subtle changes that no one yet understands. While Jonathan Harker remained trapped in the shadowed mountains of Transylvania, life in England continued with its familiar rhythm. The streets were busy, the days orderly, and the world felt safe, at least on the surface. But beneath that normality, something had already begun to move. Mina Murray, Jonathan's fiancée, was staying in the coastal town of Whitby, working as an assistant schoolteacher. She was intelligent, disciplined, and deeply practical, everything Jonathan admired. Her days were structured, her evenings calm. She wrote regularly in her journal, partly out of habit and partly to keep her thoughts organized while Jonathan was away. Her closest companion was Lucy Westenra, a young woman known for her warmth, beauty, and gentle nature. Lucy had recently received marriage proposals from 3 different men, each sincere and devoted in his own way. Though she eventually accepted one, the attention left her emotionally unsettled, torn between excitement and guilt. Through letters exchanged between Mina and Lucy, we begin to see the contrast between their lives and Jonathan's situation. Their words are light, affectionate, and filled with small details. Weather, walks along the shore, wedding plans. Yet there are hints of unease hidden between the lines. Mina worries about Jonathan. His letters, when they arrive, feel strange. They are polite, composed, and careful, too careful. He writes nothing alarming, yet nothing comforting either. There is an emotional distance in his words, as though he is holding something back. Mina senses it immediately, though she cannot explain why. Lucy, on the other hand, begins to change in subtle ways. She speaks of restless nights and vivid dreams. She mentions waking without remembering how she fell asleep, or feeling as though she has been walking in her sleep. At first, these incidents seem harmless, nothing more than nervous excitement or exhaustion. But Mina notices patterns. Lucy grows pale. Her energy fades. She complains of a strange weakness that no amount of rest seems to cure. Despite the sea air and calm surroundings, she appears to be slowly draining, as if something unseen is feeding on her strength. One evening, Mina observes Lucy sleepwalking toward the cliffs overlooking the sea. Alarmed, she follows her and manages to guide her back safely. Lucy remembers nothing of the incident the next morning, brushing it off with a laugh, but Mina cannot forget the expression on her face that night, peaceful, distant, and entirely unlike her friend. Around this time, a violent storm strikes the coast near Whitby. A mysterious ship runs aground, its crew missing, its cargo strange and undocumented. The event becomes the talk of the town, though no one can explain how the ship arrived without guidance or where its crew went. Mina records every detail. She has always believed in preparation, in understanding before reacting. And now, without knowing it, she is gathering the first pieces of a puzzle far larger and darker than she imagines. Lucy's condition worsens. Doctors are called, but none can identify the cause of her illness. She sleeps more, eats less, and grows weaker by the day. At times, she speaks with an unfamiliar intensity, her voice low and distant, as if responding to something no one else can hear. Mina writes constantly to Jonathan, to friends, to herself. Her words remain calm, but the fear beneath them grows. She feels surrounded by unanswered questions, bound together by coincidence too precise to ignore. Far away, in a castle of stone and shadows, Jonathan is fighting for his survival. In England, Mina and Lucy stand unknowingly at the edge of the same darkness. The distance between them is vast, but the threat that connects them is closer than any of them realize.